Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog. So just as a quick note, because I have been receiving some complaints from viewers in the past, today's album is coming to us from Brazil, in which they speak Portuguese. Now the names of the songs are also in Portuguese and I don't want to be making mistakes, so whatever I can I'll just translate over to English, so know that whatever song names I say, they're actually originally in Portuguese. And yeah, with that being said, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So it has been quite a while since we've had a truly obscure band on the list. Now I don't mean a band that is really not that well known because, you know, they're just really obscure in a way, but rather a band that just really answers my personal definitions of what obscurity means. And when I rate obscurity, I think of three parameters, being location, longevity, and exposure. So today's band, called Stratus actually comes to us from Sao Paulo in Brazil. Now this right away makes them a pretty obscure band, just because a lot of the people from the West don't usually go to these further regions of the earth to discover new music, because there's plenty in our Western culture as well. But this is only the first parameter. The second one is of course longevity. Now this band formed in 2017. The Prog archive states that these guys were formed back in 2007, which makes no sense, and I'm gonna elaborate it afterwards. So they are also pretty new and not known by a lot of people, and I'm actually pretty surprised that someone even knew them well enough to actually recommend them on the list. But I do believe that these guys have some stronger suits in actually getting to be well known, and that is of course living in the age of internet, where distance doesn't mean that you have to be and remain obscure. And these guys, well, it really helped them with exposure. Now I do believe that at this current moment, Stratus is one of those bands that you just hear from someone else, so much like I've heard from them from an anonymous recommender on this year's list, as well as I am recommending them to you right now, and that's how the word of mouth will spread about this very unique band. So yeah, and with all that considered, I do believe this band to still be a pretty obscure band. Even if they have a pretty notable amount of ratings on the Prog archives, they still have a long way to go until actually most people would know who I'm talking about. And the reason I'm pointing this entire thing out in the first place is much for the same reason as someone actually noted in one of my recent live streams. Someone actually said that the best prog is found only on YouTube. And well, these guys can be found on Spotify, but the premise still remains. The best prog sometimes happens to be the most obscurest of prog, and that is, well, pretty true in my personal experience. These guys might be new into the scene, they might be from one of the furthest regions of the earth to us, yet they are really freaking good, and that really resonated with me in this album. So before I actually get into reviewing this album today, let's firstly get acquainted with this band, of which I don't know a lot about, but what I do know I'll share with you right now. So Stratus, as I said, formed back in 2017, where all the band members were still teenagers themselves, none of them even reaching the age of 20. And well, when on the Prog archives it stated that this band formed back in 2007, I was cracking my head around that conundrum, trying to realize how a bunch of infants have formed a jazz fusion prog group. But nevertheless, these guys were still pretty young when they started off, and they actually started off by playing on Brazilian children's TV shows, which is a really good start if you ask me, especially for the fact that these guys were not playing your average pop, but instead playing one of the wildest forms that you can imagine in prog rock music, which happens to be the jazz rock fusion. Now, just as a quick informational nugget, in 2017 yet another thing happened, and that was the inclusion of a new member into the seminal band Gong named Fabio Golfetti. Now that doesn't mean a lot within itself, but then you learn that Fabio's son, which is called Gabriel Golfetti, is actually a member of Stratus Luna. And later on in 2018, the band came out with their first ever release in the form of a single called Pandas Voadores, which means flying pandas. And this album would later be given some context when it would be included in the debut album by the band, being their eponymous album released in 2019, which is of course the album we're reviewing today. Now, as it stands, this is their only studio album, but seeing as they've released 2 singles in 2021, we can be expecting yet another full release from them in the near future. And yeah, that's basically Stratus Luna for you. They are comprised of 4 members, being the 2 Santiago brothers, the one playing the guitars and the other playing keyboards, sitar, and flutes. Gabriel Golfetti plays the bass on here, and Giovanni Lenti is on the drums. Now, you might have noticed that I have not mentioned which one is the vocalist, and that's because none of them are the vocalist. There are actually no vocals in this band's music, because in true jazz fusion fashion, these guys have went for the full instrumental route, and thus their music is entirely instrumental. Now, honestly, I don't think there's a need to go song by song on here, and instead I will describe to you the full experience that I had with this entire album. So when listening to this one, the first major thing that popped into my head was the fact that you can take out a lot of varied influences to be found on here, mostly taken from other prog artists. So on the one hand, you have the steel guitar, which is very reminiscent of the original David Gilmour sound, and then as well you have some very beautiful keyboard playing, which sounds a lot like what you'd find by Rick Wakeman. And yes, I know that these 2 artists aren't actually jazz fusion artists, but that's a part of the beauty of this album. While it is being encapsulated under the jazz fusion stigma, it doesn't confine itself solely to it, and it actually ventures out and explores other realms of general progressive rock music. And this new band have made an album which comprises of 7 tracks, which are all individually unique from one another. Now, that might not sound to you like a lot, but you happen to note that especially when it comes to instrumental albums, it mostly happens the case that songs don't really have a lot of differentiation from one another, and at the end of the listening experience, you're kind of just sitting there thinking that it was just like one entire jumbled mess. Personally, songs that I would point out have to be the opener called Nimu and the song called NREM1, which both feature the amazing capabilities of Gustavo Santiago on the synths as well as the keyboards. And the track Blowgun features an incredible Indian-inspired psychedelic section, which honestly was quite worrying for me, seeing as it sounded a lot like psychedelic music and the psychedelic experience as a whole, and seeing as basically children wrote this part of the song, I am really wearisome of thinking that they actually have some experience with psychedelic substances. And I would also point out the song called Ephemeral, because that one has a lot of the original Brazilian roots in it, which is something that I found to be very close and personal in a way, and I honestly thought it to be very fun to listen to as well. So overall, I really enjoyed this album. It's a really unique sound, much like the other albums that we reviewed from Brazil, like Bacamarchi's Depois do Fim, which honestly have their own unique tinge to the music, which I like very much so. And this album is also perfectly timed, clocking in at around about 46 minutes of runtime, which is to me just the perfect amount of music that I have to take in one sitting. So personally, I will be keeping a keen eye on this band, and I'll do this right now and I'll say my prediction, although I don't know if it would be correct, but something tells me that this isn't the magnum opus we'll be seeing by Stratus Luna, and their real greatness would come in the form of one of their future albums. Of course, that is just a prediction, but with the way that these guys actually handle their form and the music they're composing, composing, I do believe they could do much better than this in the future, but as of now they've given us a splendid album, which is to me a brilliant form of art in the realm of jazz fusion music. So this album cover was made by guitarist Ricardo Santiago. Now personally it doesn't look like a lot, and I don't think that there's a lot to dive into this one, but there's also something about its sense of reality that seems kind of skewed to me. Like, I know that this is a real image and it was just taken in real life and it's not photoshopped in any way, but something about the way that physics or geometry or whatever seems to work on this one just couldn't be entirely comprehended by my brain. Something seems off about this one, and honestly I don't even know if that was intentional. Nevertheless, I do believe that the objects to be seen on here probably have some significance that I don't know about, and I couldn't really find a lot of extra information, especially not about this album's cover, so we're left to have to be thinking about this cover without further explanation. So this one is a very strong debut, and for that I do believe that it gets a very fine rating of 8 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Todd Rundgren's Utopia by the band Utopia. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wan, Arist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.